Welcome to another edition of Politics Done Right. My name is Egberto Willies, your host. Today, we're honored to have Patrick Lovell. Patrick Lovell is the producer of The Con, where he discussed the fraudulent mortgage shenanigans that took down the economy in 2008. Today, we begin the series, How the Billionaire Class Got Away with Their Power Accumulation Over the Last 14 Years. Lovell calls himself the producer with the $71 trillion truth that the entire system depends on and hid from everyone that still doesn't get it. Without further ado, hail Senor Patrick Lovell. How are you doing, my dear brother?
It's great to see you today, and just continued adulation for your role in attempting to inform and reconfigure the paradigm in terms of how people are interpreting the information, because we're obviously in a crisis situation.
Well, look, folks, this is a several part series, and today we're going to tackle what Patrick calls the now. And in the now, we're going to discuss what's happening in the aftermath of the election, the hand wringing that's occurring at the DNC, positioning between the Rachel Maddow-led resistance and you know what, and the enormous reaction to the Brian Thompson assassination and messaging of the power. That last statement may seem last piece may seem a bit out of place, but we're going to tie this all together for you. But anyhow, hey, Patrick, what's the damn aftermath of this crazy election?
Well, it's incredible, Egberto, and also, seeing how you're unpacking this on a daily basis is so important and crucial. But for example, this morning I happened to see Democracy Now! And Amy Goodman trying to wrap their heads around with the gentleman from Yale, who is an expert in tyranny and fascism.
I know who you mean. He has that book, that small book out. I can't remember his name right now, but yeah.
Right, but again, everybody's asking the same question that you so eloquently had prescribed in your opening, in terms of the billionaire class, the billionaire control, the billionaire apparatus. Who are they? And everybody's kind of scrambling to reposition in the aftermath of this monumental disaster, which, interestingly enough, obviously had a very close outcome at the voting booths between Kamala Harris ticket and, of course, all things Donald Trump and company. Go ahead.
I just want to tell folks that I think we're talking about Timothy Snyder.
Absolutely.
On tyranny, 20 lessons from the 20th century. Continue, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. And, everybody's starting to set the table, particularly if you see online on X, folks like Robert Reich, but again, in the whole corridor of Rachel Maddow and the nexus of MSNBC, NBC. And I'm a huge fan of Lawrence O'Donnell, and Lawrence O'Donnell has been hyper-focused recently on all things Elon Musk. Mm-hmm. However, the question is, where was this conversation 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago? I had observed firsthand, because I had spent a lot of time on X trying to get this information that we're going to discuss with your viewers on that social media platform. And I saw from the very beginning, when Elon took over X, the calculation was Elon, the billionaire, the world's richest man, single-handedly decided to buy X for what at that time period? Well, it was obviously to express what he was deeming free speech, some sort of kickback variation of what was happening on X from Jack Dorsey and company when they were basically, shall we say, strangling MAGA, at least from their perspective. However, we all know that's ridiculous. And it was also an exemplar of, quite frankly, propaganda, meaning anytime you had Trump tweeting in the 2020 sort of run up to what became the insurrection, it was a tool that was used for communication that was also, among other things, used in the insurrection. So, of course, Jack Dorsey and company decided to exclude Donald Trump from X, but that became in this sort of referendum from MAGA about free speech. And of course, we know that conservatives aren't particularly concerned about free speech. In fact, quite the contrary for the past 40, 50 years. However, suddenly it became their sort of fully throated version of what I would call all things Donald Trump, which is to lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate. So what's that have to do with tyranny? What's that have to do with fascism? Well, you can't get to tyranny and fascism without propaganda. What is propaganda? lies. What is X? A manifestation of a platform of lies that I myself, as a producer, if I had the resources, Egberto, could demonstrate that we're seeing literally millions of lies per second generated in the context and in the sort of proclamation of propaganda. For what outcome? Well, for this outcome that everybody seemingly is trying to wrap their heads around right now, which is, where did Elon come from? What is this billionaire class? How do they control the situation? And suddenly that's become the narrative. However, we've known this is the story for literally 14 years plus, but it's just gone on overdrive. It keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And of course, when you tie in the apparatuses of government, i.e. our democracy, i.e. the stopgap where the rule of law is supposedly supreme, where no man or company is supposed to be above the law. And of course, we've seen, particularly on X, a lot of memes circulating recently that had prescribed that, wait a second, the 14th Amendment, Section 3 says clearly, and I've seen this all over X recently, that no official or officer of the United States can participate in an election to run for office, let alone the chief executive office, if they were involved with an insurrection. And you're thinking to yourself, I'm thinking to myself, what month are we in? Why wasn't this the question circulating 6 months ago when Elon took over X to generate all of this hyper partisanship, all this hyper MAGA demonstration that would lead to these, what we would, in these sorts of Trump sort of rallies, which reminds a lot of people, of course, the types of rallies that may have been a part of the 1933 Germany, for example, right? But at the same time, nobody was actually in mainstream media specifically looking into this and calling out, wait a second, all of this is part of an incredibly concerted effort on top of the information that we knew coming out of the 2016 election. And let's not forget about Prigozhin at the time, who was part of what was called the IRA, part of Putin's social media contacts with the KGB, that were able to create all sorts of manifestations. And you might call it, I think you had referred to it as shenanigans when we talk about the financial crisis. But this was full-throated intelligence propaganda to generate controversy, to do what? Lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate, and create a culture war that would lead to all of these sorts of scenarios. And so what I hold to you in terms of the now is it's too late to hand wring and circle the wagons around. All of a sudden, we're going to identify who the potential threat is when the election's already been lost, when the House has been lost, when the presidency has been lost. And lest we forget, the Supreme Court was lost, when all of the people should have been asking these questions about, wait a second, the Supreme Court is going to provide presidential immunity to make him above the law, above the 14th Amendment, Section 3. All of these are in a concerted effort to do what? Manifest power, complete control, and a hyperbolic, I was about to say.
I think it is hyperbolic. I mean, to put it bluntly, to say when you mentioned about Twitter and the power that it got, that gave them exponential power, because what Elon Musk did was took over the platform, reinstate. He didn't even have to reinstate Donald Trump, because Donald Trump messaging from his own platform was making it just fine on Twitter, and now he's back on Twitter. So, I mean, as it turns out, they have their own propaganda machine that also has some quote unquote reputation, because all the journalists are there. Everybody is on the platform. And in as much as many are leaving to go to Blue Sky or whatever, it still has penetration, and it still has the power of some sort of a validity.
Well, let's not forget about this incredibly important scene in the Super Bowl 2 years ago, when in Rupert Murdoch's press box, he was seated next to, of all people, Elon Musk. This was in the Kansas City, Philadelphia Super Bowl in Atlanta 2 years ago. And I was thinking to myself at that time, oh, those guys are up to no good. And let's fast forward to the revelation after the insurrection, where during the big lie on Fox that Rupert Murdoch and company had admitted to a $700 million settlement in the Dominion voting booth story, where Rupert Murdoch had admitted Fox's business platform is a lie. So here you have Rupert Murdoch and Fox that have admitted that everything that they were doing in concert with all of the sorts of elements that we're talking about that are very sophisticated in terms of this media apparatus and this sort of technology that has gone into basically manipulating people who are short on time, short on bandwidth, don't understand full issues completely, suddenly get caught up in what you just described as this hyperbolic sort of fanaticism of what? Blame the other. Have we not seen that throughout this entire story?
And interestingly, I think we have to kind of expand on what you're talking about, how the media interpreted this whole issue. We take a look at how X was purchased. We take a look at how the left-wing media pretty much said, "Oh, how stupid Elon is! After all, the price of the price of Twitter tanked." But who cares if the price of Twitter tanked? That's not where Elon was going to make his money, not profited from Twitter. Look, he's made $171 billion since the election of Trump. But it even gets better. People laugh. They made a big issue of, hey, Fox is going to pay almost $1 billion for lying. Well, they lied even more, and they appreciated more than $1 billion. I would say that was a good investment on the part of both Fox and Musk.
Lying is the point, and there's a huge dollar sign at the end of it. You made an incredibly important point. So let's consider twofold here. First of all, Elon was projected to have purchased, Twitter on his own, just like, quite frankly, and here's kind of a corollary to this, just like Donald Trump was projected during the January 6th inquiry and so forth, as having been the mastermind of the January 6th insurrection. Now, let's compare both of these in terms of how ridiculous they are. Elon Musk did not purchase X for $43 billion out of his own pocket. Now, I don't know exactly how many billions he spent. It was definitely billions, okay? But again, like you just prefaced, the guy was worth, up until the election, he was worth somewhere in the neighborhood of about
200 billion.
Yeah, 250 billion, which is by far the richest guy on the planet, right? But at the same, and then we can talk about how a lot of that money was made, which is tied into everything that we're going to talk about.
Right.
But ultimately, he didn't spend that money on his own to purchase Twitter. He had a consortium of A, the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, B, private equity groups, which this concert of private equity is probably the biggest theft deception racket in the history of financial, what I'd call terrorism in the United States, particularly if you understand their role in healthcare. But beyond that, then you had the two big DeFale apparatuses, the banks that, of course, are connected to what I'm going to reveal to you through this series, that are basically the foundation of this entirety of the system that ultimately paid billions of dollars to finance the purchase of Twitter for Elon Musk. And of course, the valid point that you made, that everybody was kind of in mainstream media ridiculing Elon for having lost a lot of money in the stock initially, but now look who's laughing, right? Because Elon spent $300+ million on the Trump campaign, and whatever billions he invested alongside all of these other stopgaps, which are there. Oh yeah, and least we forget 2 billionaire oligarchs from Russia that were heavily invested in Twitter as well. Where's the Justice Department on all this stuff based on that? Okay, and we'll circle back to that in a second. But just the brass tacks of the business model. Suddenly now we're looking at, after the election, Elon Musk's net worth on paper has increased $160+ billion. Is that from selling more Teslas, my friend? No. Which again is tied to completely. And by the way, who's asking the question? And I'll bring it full circle to the stuff that we're going to have to reveal as we move forward. Merrick Garland's Justice Department could have been up the backside of this entire thing the whole time. Same with, quite frankly, in my opinion, I'm very critical of Joe Biden's presidency, who could have used the bully pulpit in the aftermath of the SCOTUS decision to be above the law in service to the American people, to wage war, literally. I'm talking about not,
No, I understand.
But to go after SCOTUS and Musk, among others. And that brings us full circle to the task at hand, the now, right? So as all of these mainstream media outlets and everybody's trying to suss out what's going on, whether it's Tom Hartman in a more progressive scenario, whether it's like we just said this morning on Democracy Now!, Everybody's trying to wrap their hands around the billionaire question, but nobody has the answers that you so brilliantly prescribed in your introduction of what we're going to talk about. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're revealing is how this system has manifested and what it means.
And I tell you what, we talk about, let's say the Justice Department getting played, or even Biden getting played. I don't even know if it is that they're getting played or this is how power is maintained. I don't know if you realize, and I talk a whole lot about this in which, we talk about having progressives or whatever, but and I think we should migrate into that DNC hand wringing. The DNC really never wanted a progressive type economic system at all. And what they do, if you take a look at how they held back, how Pelosi held back AOC recently from taking the position of being the watchdog, if you take a look at how they move, Sinema and Manchin were tools that the Democratic establishment wanted to have there to pretty much put progressive policies at bay so that the status quo could be maintained, and these billionaires who hold power, who owns them, continue in power. I mean, I think it's something that they don't understand. So let's move to the second point as far as DNC hand wringing. Express that.
Well, your point is monumentally important because the one thing I was mostly critical in the election cycle, particularly as it related to the Harris-Walz campaign, and I thought they did an otherwise very, very strong campaign, minus what I've put into our website, which we'll discover downstream, which was had Harris become the prosecutor versus the felon, that would have been potentially the roadmap to revealing the power apparatus that controls the DNC, like you've said. So both of the two-party system has been completely controlled and maintained and answers to the billionaire oligarchy, whether it's billionaires themselves or the apparatuses, whether it's the military-industrial complex, the fossil fuel machine, the financial machine. They have been completely in control probably most of my lifetime, but it doubled down after the monumental
collapse of 2008.
But it's the cataclysm,
right?
Everything that we are, because it wasn't just the economic collapse; it was the collapse of the integrity of our institutions.
Let me stop you a second there, because I want you to remember that the fear that the plutocracy had then was that would have been the excuse to can capitalism at that point, to prove that it is a failed economic system. I want folks to understand that when the system froze up and had to be bailed out, not by the plutocracy, but by expanding the dollars of yours, that's not exactly that way. That is what saved
and credit of the United States, Egberto.
There you go. Continue, my brother.
Well, to that point too, and the point that I'm going to clarify a little bit as we move forward in this whole thing too, though, is that, and I know this ruffles some feathers, but we've got to understand the nuances of capitalism. Capitalism is supposed to be risk reward. And what we were talking about in the aftermath of 2008, as you've just described so eloquently, again, is this notion that we called moral hazard back in the day, which is when bad decisions and, quite frankly, corrupt institutions that were involved in the largest racketeering scheme in the history of the world collapsed, completely failed. We did not let them fail.
I think you made a statement that I think needs to be explained. This racketeering system we're talking about stems from what we call derivatives, etc., that created instruments that were circular that eventually collapsed on themselves. Go ahead.
Yeah, the idea of that, just to quantify it, was we had a $4.5 trillion housing market in 2006-07, but it had morphed through the derivatives that you've just annotated into a $600 to $800 trillion global calamity because of the derivatives that were all predicated on lies and deception, which is racketeering, by the way, that could have easily been sussed out and wasn't. And we'll get to that at some point. And I do want to make this statement about AOC being kind of the watchdog on this situation. One thing that definitely bent me a little bit was about 6 months ago. AOC had gone public with a statement, and maybe it was brought out of context and some other things, and we could discuss it, but I want to use it to make this point. She said racketeering, RICO, isn't a crime. RICO is the mother of all financial crime.
Right.
It's organized crime. And unfortunately, AOC at the moment when she made that statement was a mistake. It was probably out of context. Who knows? I don't want to make any excuses for her. But the point being is that to become a watchdog in the system, which we all have to become a watchdog in the system, we all have to wrap our heads around global racketeering, which is what spawns the billionaire class to be able to maneuver this massive contagion of propaganda that has given us fascism. My shortcut, Egberto, is corruption births and fuels fascism. But I want to bring it back to capitalism, and this is the whole mind-bending dissertation of the whole thing. The way I describe our system is that we're not a democracy, because a democracy would hold that the law is supreme and that the law has integrity. Well, what we're revealing to you is the law has been suppressed through corruption, which is easily provable, discernible facts based on discovery, based on fact patterns that in our system of justice go through indictments and the litany of things that would ultimately lead to convictions, all of which, of course, Donald Trump has been able to escape as a result of being. Go ahead.
I want to simplify something that you just said, because what you said is a statement of fact. But to simplify it for something that the audience will understand, just look at what the Supreme Court did in saying that anything Donald Trump does under the facade of being in power is actually, he has immunity for that.
Which is insane when you consider what the undergirding structure is, what I'm revealing to you. Because, see, what I've been revealing to a lot of people for some time is that Donald Trump is a red carpet reflection to the emperor's new clothes in the context of can you see the forest for the trees? Because what the government of the United States did, and this is the ultimate of what we're going to reveal, is that it had been in the process of indicting, and this is a bit of a shortcut, indicting Donald Trump. And this goes back to my point about Kamala Harris being the prosecutor versus the felon. But the sum total of all of the different initiatives, whether it was Jack Smith, whether it was Fani Willis, of course, all things Letitia James, and I think that pretty much covers it. Yeah, the whole stuff with, of course, the corruption in Palm Beach and Judge Eileen Cannon.
Yeah,
is another aspect of this. But the sum total of this was literally that Donald Trump defrauded the United States using deceptive acts and practices that included, among other things, falsification of business records on a mass scale that also included the falsifications of the electoral scheme to steal the electoral college. Okay. All of those were the sum total of racketeering. Okay, there were organized criminal activities that led to what? The insurrection, of which the Supreme Court made Donald Trump above the law. They made the president a king, of which Biden, unfortunately, didn't manifest in the last months of his outgoing administration to do what we talked about by going after Elon Musk and the billionaire class. Because why? Because they're hedged. Because the billionaires have complete control and hijacked our system, not just of government, but the economy, because of what we call monopoly. But the way they were able to do that is ultimately what we're going to reveal through this.
So the DNC is just holding time right now. They're just pacing in time right now, not doing anything. I mean, if you take Hakeem Jeffries, all of that, yeah, they kind of held back Trump a little bit in this last when they tried to get. I mean, I do want to give them some credit about that, though, not raising the debt ceiling right now. And to prevent what could have been a free pass for Trump immediately to go ahead and just spend for the billionaires like it's out of style.
Well, I know, and that's the whole point here of Elon Musk being in position to actually puppeteer Trump. And you've got to ask yourself, well, who is Elon Musk in bed with, right? Because the big question I've always had at this stage of the game is what purpose does it serve to have Elon, who I refer to, and those of your older viewers who used to love James Bond movies would appreciate, I call him Spectre, the guy with his ownership of, SpaceX and
Tesla.
Yeah, well, yeah, but also, why can't I think of the rocket? It's not just SpaceX. What is it that has the internet? Why can't I think of the name?
Skylink.
Skylink, right?
Starlink.
Starlink. Skylink probably was Spectre, by the way.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. But it's like, okay, the guy's the richest man in the world. The guy has already been able to create largesse for himself with all sorts of subsidies from the United States government going back to the Obama administration. But where did he start his game? He started his game with Peter Thiel, when they had PayPal and the PayPal mafia. And if you fast forward to what they're doing now, and this has been this undercurrent, and it involves Trump all of a sudden, which is a trip, but it also involves, by the way, Bobby Kennedy, but it goes to this global consortium of racketeering and money and control and monopoly and the billionaire apparatus, which is the new Confederacy, as far as I'm concerned. It's the
I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. You're kind of jumping into the next topic, but I want to point out something else. Since we brought up Starlink, realize that what Musk had with Starlink is the ability to control a war between Ukraine and Russia.
That's right.
There should never be a Starlink in the control of private hands that then can decide the outcome of wars because of communication issues. I mean, that people cannot see why there are certain sectors where the private sector should not reign supreme. It behooves me. But Elon Musk had to be stopped at one point from putting the brakes on Ukraine.
Well, and that is the perfect point too, because ultimately, not just that, but just think about mass communication. Mm-hmm. Just think about what we're also talking about with the purchase of X. This would make Joseph Goebbels smile. And if you don't know who Joseph Goebbels is.
Oh, yes, from Nazi. Oh, yeah.
You know, and just in terms of the purpose of psychology and corruption and control for fascism. I mean, that's pretty much the progression. But going back to probably the biggest failure of mainstream media, as they've been hyper focused on Donald Trump and all his debauchery and stupidity and ignorance and all of the other things, that he's just a small version of the whole, that he's just a transactional.
That's it. He's a tool. He's a tool.
He's a tool in the full circus, by the way. But let's go back to what the Pentagon said a day before the election. The Pentagon was quoted as saying in the New York Times, and also there was a subsequent story by Rachel Maddow, and this goes to our broader point, where it was at the very end, she decided, I'm going to focus a little bit on Elon Musk, but far too late and too little, because the Pentagon was saying, and this goes to your point of revolving door and contracts and who's owned in the lobbyist square and all the rest of it. The Pentagon was basically saying, look, because of Starlink and because of the threats around the globe, Elon gives us an opportunity to get to the threat assessment at the speed of threat. Okay. That's what they're hedging. It's like, he can give us information on China and everybody else, so we're going to keep him there. Let's not worry about him doing an overthrow of the United States government.
Right. Because he is in But the interesting thing about it, right, is that the United States, when it comes to other countries, right, I don't know, the oil policy has always been, if any country holds back oil from the United States, they consider it a national event that they are legally able to use military power to handle.
True.
But then they have this little punk from South Africa who got Starlink in some particular fashion, and somehow they can't control this guy.
And he's involved with Putin.
It's like, I mean, it is like, amazing.
But what's that tell you? Like the DNC, right? That's
right.
They're hedged. They've got their hands tied behind their back because we've had 4 decades of revolving door, because we've basically watered down the regulations, the ethics, and everything else. And so, for example, we see Senator Whitehouse, over the course of the last several months, basically being, and same with Robert Reich, hey, we have to have ethics for the Supreme Court. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court just basically etch-a-sketched the United States history by absolving the 14th Amendment, Section 3, among other things, right?
Yeah.
Where they made the president a king because of corruption that we now know about. So it's kind of like, it's such a facade. It's so ridiculous that we all can see it clearly. And we've heard forever and a day that the system is corrupt, it's rigged. But what we're here to inform people about is how it is, who did what, when, and how, who got what in the process, and what nobody else is talking about. Because if you don't have the blueprint for how the machine works, you can't understand how to stop it and to reboot it. The whole purpose of what we're doing right here is honestly to redeem the dream.
Now, we're going to end this sort of on a teaser. We're going to spend a few minutes on the interesting thing that happened a couple of weeks ago when Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Health, was murdered by Luigi Mangione. Your thoughts on the messaging power there and how the people have actually reacted? Because here are my thoughts, and I want to be careful here because I don't want anybody to listen to this program and think that somehow we are sanctioning murder. For those that are listening on the right that are going to try to interpret it that way, you're simply wrong. What we want is a messaging that just as we call out a murder of one CEO, that we call out the multi-thousands of murders per year that these healthcare industries impose on us by not just neglect, but knowingly holding back care that we know is they're legally responsible for. Your thoughts?
Well, and I'll take that a step further. I'll say that what we're talking about is the sum total of the murder of the American dream, because the law is not supreme. So in context to Luigi Mangione, I posted this the other day. I thought to myself, it was reported that he had been reading a lot of Ted Kaczynski towards the end, towards this action. And I thought to myself, if Luigi, in his charisma and his intelligence and his contacts and everything else, were paying attention to the details that I'm revealing, he would have been able to fight the system using the law and the momentum and the truth as the power versus going off unhinged in a way that, obviously it led to this kind of weird symphony in the aftermath. Did you see that footage of Eric Adams and the NYPD doing the perp walk with Luigi after the fact?
Wait, let me stop you there. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. A helicopter comes down, it lands on the pier, and the mayor is out there to greet the murderer. What does that say about the importance and the people? I mean, it blew my mind. It
blew my mind because what do we know Eric Adams is in charge for? He's indicted for corruption based on taking foreign money influences from places like Turkey, among other things. But here's the thing that we're going to have to go into downstream, but I'm just going to tease it this way. This is the ultimate cliffhanger. So I started off my journey in the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis after living through it and after going through a bunch of stuff that threw my life in the tumble cycle that ultimately led me as a producer to start asking questions and beginning to investigate, and then been putting together this, what led to an odyssey of about 14 years of piecing together all of the elements that we're going to reveal, but that come to a head in this particular case. So for example, my partner and I, Eric Vaughn, had gone on the road during the Occupy Wall Street movement, where we basically surfed the Occupy Wall Street wave in the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis to land in Manhattan at Zuccotti Park the day the NYPD was breaking it up. Now, get a load of this, Egberto. There was a lot of rumorville that there was a lot of the too big to fail apparatuses that had infiltrated the NYPD and were providing incredible healthcare, incredible stuff for their pensions, upsides and bonuses, and, like state-of-the-art workout facilities, where it was kind of like almost it appeared to be a pay-to-play scenario, okay? Now, that was terrifying when you think of the money-powered and access of Manhattan and the elites in context to the power of the NYPD, right? Now, before that, I was very aware of corruption in South America and places like Brazil and Rio.
In all the countries they like to call third or second world countries.
That's right, where this sort of thing has been going on for decades. And in fact, just a little antidote to that, like the billionaire class in Rio and in Sao Paulo have the highest purchase percentage of helicopters in the world because they can't go to the ground because they got to fly from building to building, because if they go to the ground, they end up getting kidnapped because the corruption's so bad, right? I mean, that's what happened for years and decades before this whole situation. And so when I I was in Manhattan when this whole thing went down. I'm like, whoa, this is a little strange, right? What I found out recently, and this blew my mind in context of what we're talking about with Eric Adams, the NYPD, and Luigi doing the perp walk after the helicopter. And he just this morning had pled not guilty. But as it turns out, a woman by the name of Jessica, oh my God, and the last name is going to elude me at the moment, and I don't want to look it up because it'll come to me in just 1 second. Tish. From the Tish family, which is one of the billionaire families out of Manhattan. Their name's on the NY School of Law. And also, I mean, they've got huge influence all over Manhattan. It turns out Jessica Tish is now the chief police officer for the NYPD. And I was like, what? She has no police experience. She didn't come up through the ranks. She's a billionaireess that threw $150 million into surveillance and all sorts of anti-terror sorts of monitoring of lower Manhattan in the aftermath of the great financial crisis that then Goldman Sachs was involved with, Chase was involved with, all the recipients of what we talked about, the largesse that created this manifestation of what we're in the midst of. And now she's the chief of police in Manhattan. Because why, Egberto?
I mean, this is news to me. I didn't realize that she was a heiress.
Billionaireess, man.
I didn't know that.
Yes. Well, surprise and news to you and your listeners, man, and your viewers, because ultimately they're the ones, because as you may recall and kind of read between the lines on this one in terms of media, right? But there was a lot of like, wait a second, how in the world was this guy Luigi able to sneak past the sort of web of all of the monitors and the cameras and everything else to pull out this gun in public on whatever street that he was able to murder the CEO from United Healthcare, Mark Thompson, right? I'm sorry, I butchered his name. But the long and the short of it is, it's like they were referring to this massive web complex that the Tish family donated $150 million.
Just to correct, Brian Thompson.
Brian Thompson. Yeah. I said Brian Thompson. So look, man, it's everywhere. The thumbprints are everywhere. We could go into deep dive, and we will, but the now is got to be fomented from this particular situation, guys. And I'm a fan of Rachel Maddow. Okay. I really love her deep dive and her analysis when she does stuff right. And she's got incredible resources and she's incredibly intelligent. Her work on her podcast, Ultra,
is great. Exceptional.
Fantastic. And a warning that the white supremacist class that were in concert, as it turns out, with the Nazis back in, before World War II, they've been, and McCarthy and everything that transpired. And by the way, when she revealed that this, that Trump trying to steal the election by using electioneering and then, electoral certification fraud is not the first time this happened. It happened back during McCarthy as well, which was right. So her work is magnificent when she's pointed in the right direction. But she did. I think she took a pay cut, but $42 million a year to not tell you how the people that are puppeteering the DNC and have complete control of the apparatus and the billionaires that are part and parcel to this whole thing. The way I look at it, really what it came down to is we don't have a populist movement, and that's what we're trying to generate.
That's what we must have, a populist movement that has nothing to do with the DNC, but in fact uses the DNC as its tool to move us in the right direction. And let me just give you a little quick thing here. Linda Lee, one of the big powerhouse DNC fundraisers, has left the party because the progressives have attacked her after she simply, instead of laying the blame on the people who wasted the $1.2 billion purported to elect Harris, blew it and put lots of it into their own pocket. So she's upset that the progressives are getting on her case, and now she's leaving the party.
But let me finish up with this, just two connotations here, right? So first and foremost, at $1.2 billion, it absolutely boggled my mind to see that Oprah Winfrey got paid X amount of millions of dollars to endorse Kamala Harris. I thought to myself, you got to pay for that endorsement? What? Now then you go check off the box. Okay, how much did Obama get paid? To me, this is such a disconnect. And so the point that I was trying to make is that what we're involved with is the new robber barons versus the new Confederacy. The populist movement of the era of the New Deal, quite frankly, is what I'm trying to manifest and try to get everybody's attention to understand the blueprint, the schematic of how this whole thing works, because we've etched this whole thing forward in what we call the Clean New Deal. We've got to tackle corruption because that's the only way we're going to get our democracy back.
That is exactly right. Look here. First of all, I want to thank you, Patrick Lovell. Remember, this is just the first part of the series, how the billionaire A class got away with their power accumulation over the last 14 years. Again, how the billionaire class got away with their power accumulation over the last 14 years. Patrick Lovell, the producer of The Con, which we'll have linked in the blogs as well. Thank you so kindly for having been with us on this particular episode. Until the next episode, which we'll discuss in more detail, the election. The election. You guys are going to love it. Stay tuned. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you for your time, Egberto.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number 1, subscribe to our channel. And number 2, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.